if there can be lists of top collectors, clearly that's sort of implying that it's something, at least within oneself, it's a pursuit that you can learn to do better. That's a lifelong challenge that you can get better at, that it's in part a skill, not just a personal taste. It's something you can develop and improve on. But the question is then, what is it? What's that quality that you'd want to improve?
Welcome to Voices on Art, the Van Horn Gallery podcast hosted by Daniela Steinfeld. Voices on Art is available on our website van-horn.net, your preferred podcast platform, and our YouTube channel Van Horn Gallery with subtitle tools. Listen, subscribe, and leave a rating if you like it. I'm Daniela, and this podcast is about my personal and also about a lot of other people's enthusiasm for art. Art can touch on all parts of life, and therefore we talk about all parts of life. I hope to get you on board and to tell you interesting stories you enjoy listening to. We're recording via the internet, so please excuse any glitches and sound quality. We're celebrating Voices on Art's 100th episode, and I invited a special guest on this occasion. Today I'm welcoming as my guest Jeff Magid. He has the Instagram account Magid Eye, and this is actually how I came about him, because I just listened to diverse, very personal insights and some rants and some very open words. I really enjoyed listening to it. Jeff comes actually from music. He used to be a songwriter and a music producer and poker player. And now he's a collector of contemporary as well as old master art. Welcome to the podcast, Jeff.
Thank you for having me.
I read a little bit about you, how you started, but where do you come from actually? How did you grow up? How did it come then that you came into music?
Both music and film were things that were just a natural part of my life growing up. I grew up in Boston and went to high school in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I grew up in an environment, I was really lucky. I was exposed to a lot of different things in a pretty diverse city and had friends of all different economic backgrounds. And for example, friends and I, we were making music, I don't know, since I was a little kid. I always wanted to be in a band. I loved hip hop music, wanted to be a singer. I wanted to be a rapper. I wanted to play guitar. And also a lot of friends of mine were actors and grew up wanting to act in plays or be a movie star. And I think I encountered art in the sense that I knew, I don't know, I remember drawing with friends, but I wasn't really the best drawer at all. In fact, I didn't really have much talent for visual art. And the idea of art world, I never even encountered until I was in my late 20s. I'd say I started collecting when I was 28 or 29.
Which still is young.
It felt young, but what I'd say is that I felt two things as soon as I encountered the world of art. The first was that I could tell not only that I was young, but that I could see there weren't many people like me at all.
Yeah, that's true.
In the world. And it was a surprise that this world even existed. And I went to an Ivy League university in the US. I grew up as close to centers of culture and cultural power as almost anyone. I guess I didn't grow up in New York City, but I was near New York City. I was in a major city. I went to a museum before as a kid. Was something that someone like me could be part of.
Yeah.
Or even really that there was a world going that involved lots of living people. It sort of felt like maybe, the ambition to act in movies or to make songs, even that could be on the radio, was something that felt real to me as a kid or even as a young adult. But being part of the world of Van Gogh and Picasso never even occurred to me.
Oh no, that's another world. Although
Yeah.
I think that the creative force behind it, I think that's comparable. But when it comes to cultural impact, at least pop music, popular music, or rock or whatever, has such a wider, broader audience. It's like everywhere, which probably is not true for visual arts, although we have museums everywhere. And I think actually art shaped a lot of things, how we look at the world without us even noticing, probably.
Agree. I agree. Yeah. So then really my encounter with the world of art began really by accident. I was living in Brooklyn. I was really involved in music. And as someone who only sometimes made a living in music, one of my paths to make a living was that I was playing in card games. So that was, I don't know, sort of my way out of a life of being unsure how to support myself in the arts, or my degree was in philosophy, which is also a field where I was expecting a life of struggling to get a adjunct teaching position somewhere after many years of school. And I was lucky that I had a skill in playing competitive games. I was a chess player when I was a child, and then I started playing online poker. And some of my world, especially my financial world, became online and in-person card games. So I had almost two parallel lives. One
Wow.
of creativity and writing and making. I've always sort of known that my strengths really are as a writer and with words and ideas. I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
I've never had a really beautiful singing voice. I'm not, a great actor or a, super handsome, charming performer. I feel like what I'm comfortable in or what I feel most natural in is words and ideas. I had a life of writing and writing songs, which sometimes led to professional life and sometimes didn't. And
Mm-hmm.
then I had a parallel life of competitive games and strategy, which felt separate, but also involved creative thinking and other similar things, but in a different way. And then just by accident, I encountered an artist. I had never met an artist. I didn't really even, if someone had asked me to think it through, I suppose I would have come to realize that there were working artists, not just people like, Van Gogh, who
Not only dead artists.
yeah, exactly. Or even artists that, I know that the idea that a lot of artists work their whole life unknown and then only posthumously are considered great artists. And I suppose if I thought about it, I realized there must be artists who are, alive and having flourishing careers, but I didn't never even occurred to me who they were or where they were, or that this was a world that I could show up to and be part of or go see their shows or anything. It never crossed my mind, to be honest, partly because I think I just didn't know anyone that
Mm-hmm.
was in that world. And so much of what you know is what you're exposed to.
Absolutely.
Because I was exposed to a lot. It's not like I grew up, in desperate poverty or, in a third world country. I grew up in a major city.
And an education.
Yeah, and I still just had never met anyone who knew this world. But the very first people I met, I was living in Brooklyn, and I had between 5 and 7 roommates at any given time. I lived in a house with a lot of us paying rent together,
Mm-hmm.
one apartment, but with 3 bedrooms and 6 of us living there, and everyone was musicians. And it was especially people that had really skilled but really hard to make a living
Yes.
backgrounds.
Yeah.
Two of my close friends were jazz musicians, and they were and are phenomenal musicians, but have a really hard time. It's tough
Sure.
making
Yeah.
as a jazz bass player. So they had 2 of them had gotten jobs as art handlers. And so those were the first people that I encountered.
Ah, yeah, I see. Yes, yes, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and they would come home and tell stories about. We'd all sort of, we did some music and a lot of hanging out, and so we'd all tell each other about our lives. And 2 of these people, yeah, were the first people that encountered the world of art, and they'd tell me all these crazy stories about these people with bizarre collections and requests and craning massive works of art through the window on Park Avenue and stuff. But
Hmm.
even then, it sounded, I was curious, but it didn't occur to me it was a world that I
That you could be one of them.
exactly, or even,
Yeah.
or work with them or work for them or even
Yeah.
go to their exhibitions or anything. It just sounded like a cool story of a world that I would never touch. But I was aware of it then. And then by accident, a couple of years later, I met an artist. Actually an artist who now lives in Berlin, Slater Bradley.
And it's an artist whose name one knows and whose work one knows now. I
Yeah.
don't know how it was in 2011, but now, yeah.
Yeah, and probably even, at least as much in 2011. He was a star young contemporary artist. I think he was the youngest ever artist to have a solo show at the Guggenheim at the time.
Oh,
I didn't know
wow.
what
I
any of
didn't know
that.
that. Mm.
Yeah, and I didn't know what any of it meant. Truthfully, I didn't even really know what it meant to be an artist, but I was excited to get to know his world, and he very generously invited me to it, which, and in retrospect, was the kindest and most generous thing.
And I think probably one of the best ways to get into the art world, like through the people that actually make the art.
Yes. Yeah. And in fact, I think that's one of the things that I'm hoping to change is that, in the end, it's really one of the only ways to encounter the art world is to know someone who's already in it. It kind of goes person by person.
That's true.
And I was lucky that I met Slater. But if I hadn't, I for sure we wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
Hmm.
So, in a way, I feel like I try to be the mentor and the step in for people that maybe don't have that opportunity. And also, I'd say, as an aside, as someone who's had lots of failures and successes and watched many other people have lots of good fortune, I feel like it's really important to appreciate and thank the people that helped, even created opportunities along the way. One thing that makes me sad sometimes is that the world becomes so individualistic that people
Absolutely.
find great success. And then when they're asked, hey, how did this success come? They say, oh, I did it all myself. No one helped me.
Which is impossible.
Right.
It
Yes.
is just like impossible because nobody does it just themselves. Nobody. There is always like a big bunch of people actually. One gave you that opportunity, you learned that from that one, the other one believed in you, and so on and so on and so on. It's always a whole crowd of people that support you if you know it or not. I know it's impossible to do it by ourselves. Yeah.
I agree. And sometimes it's a big show of support, but other times I think one is introducing someone to something you don't even mean to be necessarily having a big impact on their life. But the truth is, you don't know whose life you're impacting. And I think
Oh,
that
yeah.
might be true I think Slater is a very generous guy and has an artistic spirit that involves him sharing his work and therefore, but I guess what I mean is I don't even know if he thought or intended to really bring in a new participant, never mind such a engaged participant to the world of art. I think he just was a nice guy who invited his friends to come to some things, and you never know whose life you're going to change. Not
No,
to
you
say,
wouldn't expect that he thought like, oh, that's going to be like a major collector. But
right?
that would be really wow. So you said that you didn't even know what artists were or what they did, and that you learned it through Slater Bradley. And what did you learn? What artists are?
That's a good question. I'd say, especially the first context, I started to learn about how artists worked and what their creative lives were like on a daily basis, not just in the moment of, celebrating a big museum show, but in the studio each day. Was that another thing that Slater and actually another German artist, Dirk Schreber,
Oh,
um,
Dirk.
yeah.
Dirk, I know quite for a very long time.
Ah, that's so cool.
Yeah, he studied in Düsseldorf. He used to live in Düsseldorf. He actually bought one of the first pieces I ever sold when I wasn't even a gallery. I was an artist space, but Dirk Skreber bought it.
Wow, that's
Yeah, in
so cool.
2004.
2004. Oh, that's before even. Wow, yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, Dirk was really the second artist I met. Slater and Dirk were friends. They both had studios in Brooklyn, and Slater
Mhm.
brought me to Dirk's studio because Dirk was hosting our all artist poker game. So I played.
Oh,
That was really my introduction.
absolutely. Yes, sure. He plays poker. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and it was all artists. Susumu Kamijo, the painter, was there. People that I still know to this day, and it was just a very casual. They were playing for $1 and $2. It wasn't really about the money or really even about poker. It was a chance, I think, just to use it as an excuse to get together with other artists and just kind of chat about life and art and stuff. And they were nice enough to invite me. And it's partly the kind of exchange I've loved that art can bring about, where Slater said, "Hey, you should come to our poker game." And I said, "Great, I'll come when I get back from the World Series of Poker." And he said, "Wow, the World Series of Poker. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
that's crazy." He said, "We've never really met anyone that had played in the World Series of Poker." And I said, "That's great. I've never really, other than you, I've never met an artist." It was a fun trade. And I would ask them, I would just hang out with them and ask them questions. Kind of mostly I'd listen to them talk about their lives, but I'd ask questions. Like I remember asking Dirk, because I would look around the studio at his paintings and I'd like them, but I didn't entirely understand. I was
Hmm.
trying to learn, So I'd ask him things like, "How do you know when a painting is finished?"
Hmm. Sure. Yeah.
And I was really thinking of it. I only had one way of, well, I guess two ways of understanding what I was doing there. One of which is just that I've just maybe to a fault, I'm really deeply curious. I can't help
Mm.
but if someone shows me a new world or a new group of people, especially people that are doing something different than I know, I'm happy to go just to learn. So sometimes throughout my life, even, people that I'm really close to or partners have said, "Why are you're spending so much time doing this or that? Why are you doing that?" And I don't really have a good answer other than just I'm curious about what's there. I want to learn. I want to know what people are like. So mostly I just thought this is cool. Like maybe when I'm older, when I'm an old man and I'm telling my grandkids, I'll be able to say to them, "One time, a long time ago, I knew a bunch of contemporary artists in New York, and
Yeah.
it was, just something to know in your life." But I suppose the second thing that I was doing is I figured it was interesting to learn about artists in a different field, being a writer and musician, but so not a painter or sculptor
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
It was interesting to learn about their creative processes. So I sort of thought maybe I can learn something about, how to make things from people that make things that are totally different. And I did.
But don't you sometimes miss that, I remember, I mean, you just read about it, like, but in former times that all the creative people were together. It was the artists and it was the musicians and it was the authors and poets and whoever, and they kind of like all met in that salons and exchanged with each other and they shaped the image of the time. And now everything seems to be separated.
Agree. And I hope we can help to change that back.
Yeah, to reshape it again. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would be lovely. Absolutely. So this was one of the things that, because you're such a curious guy and you just like really, really like to learn about all the other fields that probably you don't know. So you started by learning a lot actually in the art world.
Hmm. Yes, yeah, but I with no plans to be part of it. I was learning just because I was curious, and then it really happened by accident that I had any role in it. It started with Slater and Dirk saying, you could collect, you could buy something from artists, and I said, "Really, me?" I had pictured. They talked sort of at the table. They'd say, "Oh, this so and so a collector is coming down, to my studio and stuff," and I pictured an elderly person with, in a chauffeured Rolls Royce, saying, "It never occurred to me it could be me."
Mm-hmm.
And also, it's worth saying, I, on the one hand, was more financially solvent at that time in my life than I ever expected to be. On the other hand, truthfully, if I had asked someone who really knew art, "Hey, I've made this much money. I'm thinking of starting to be an art collector," they might have said, "You don't have enough money." I mean, you're not able to be it. But I didn't know I wasn't able. So I didn't let that stop me. And what was I going to say? Yeah. So then basically what happened is they would invite me to art openings. I remember almost as if it was yesterday, Slater saying, "Hey, you should come to this opening at Team Gallery," which was his gallery in New York at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he sent me the opening invitation. And I remember it being a couple hours before, and I panicked. I called him and said, "Wait, do I need a tuxedo or should I get a tie before the opening? Will I be dressed appropriately?" And he laughed at me. And I remember getting there and being totally surprised. It was an opening of Corey Archangel.
Mm-hmm.
And not only was the art confusing and mysterious to me, but also one of the things I was really taking in was just who was there. It was not what I expected at all. It was, mostly younger people and really informal. And the joke that I tell with them is because I was still partly trying to figure out, okay, I see all this art is for sale, but I wonder who buys this stuff. Are they here? Is it the people in the room? What's the relationship between who's at the show and who pays for
Mm,
the show? Is something I was trying to
yeah.
figure out at the time.
And what did you figure out?
Well, it's something I'm still figuring out, to be honest.
Yeah, me too, actually.
Yeah, the joke with him, with Slater, that I told, I hope he wouldn't mind me telling this story, but I remember going to his opening and asking him, so what do you think? How's the show? And he said, I'm excited. A lot of people came, and Team Gallery thinks it's going to sell reasonably well. And I said, are a lot of collectors here? And he said, I hope so. Let's see. I'm keeping an eye out for it. And then I came to him and I said, hey, look, I think I see someone here who's a collector. And he said, who? I said, look at that woman over there in the floor length fur coat. This is a really elegant woman. I bet she's a collector. And he said, that's my mom. Um, but to me, that's what I was trying to figure out, who would be the collector, And I'm still sort of trying to figure out what it means, even the relationship between who art is for, in the sense that who a show is for when it opens, who is excited to come to the show versus who the selling of it is targeted to, or who understands that they can be part of the collecting and living with art. To me, that's a gap that I'm trying to bridge in my own public life.
But don't you think that all of these different things are important at the same time, so that you need, like we just had an opening last Friday, so 2 days ago, and it was packed. And it wasn't mostly collectors, it was mostly young people, it was artists, it was people that just love art. But still, the collectors would come now, probably would they come later, or you would need really to open the doors for them and really approach each of them individually. But it's kind of like you need all of that. It's not just like a one-way, one track where you think like, oh, well, the most important is that it sells, or the most important thing is that the museum curators come, or the most important thing is that the artists come. It's like all of that has to happen at the same time, don't you think?
Of course, yes, but also I think, to me, my goal is to break down some of the boundaries of who's in each of the groups. And I think, you can tell, I mean, the boundaries are sort of artificial. Like just think of, like, I love your story of one of the earliest people to collect from you was not, an elderly billionaire. It was Dirk Scraper in 2004,
It
you
was
know,
an artist, and it was
an artist.
also the only one at that time, because I was not a gallery and I didn't want to sell. And it was the only one I would sell to at that time because he was an artist. I thought like, oh, if an artist wants that, because I was an artist myself, so artists were sort of like the most important people to me at that time. But you're right, there are very artificial boundaries. But I think also, I mean, you address that a lot in your writing, in your interviews, and also in your Instagram channel. I think the storytelling about the art world, that it's a class system, I think it's also a little bit outdated because there's so many new ways to be able to get in if you're curious enough.
I agree. I agree. I mean, I think that there are a lot of things that aren't just about the telling. I mean, I think one of the things is just letting people know that this world exists.
Exactly.
I just did a little video interview with a guy called Sean Green, who has the company Art Terminal. And in the promo for it, he talks about us both wanting to make art more accessible. And
Hmm.
someone wrote, more accessible, what's that even mean? How could art be more accessible? And I'm glad that they asked that, because that's an important question. But I think, I mean, there's so many ways that this applies. I mean, to me, it almost feels self-evident, but I think it's actually, I'm glad someone asked, and I'm glad to think about and answer it. But one of the things I think that, the most obvious, other than just so many parts of the world, parts of every, even American city, I don't know if it's true in Germany, but so many parts of the world just don't have any access to the fine art world whatsoever, and
Hmm.
even the history of art that we tell is so American and Eurocentric. It's almost as if major continents of the world almost don't exist or didn't have art, which we know is not true. So that's a very obvious question of accessibility. But there's something even, I think, more obvious, which is just one of the biggest barriers to more people getting involved in art is just that so many people do not know this world exists or have any idea of how to be part of it.
That's true.
And people who are so far inside it, almost, if you get to the point, like a lot of the people I know who work in galleries or something similar, and even artists, a lot of their friends and social life is art world people. which is wonderful. It's cool to be able to do something that you love so much
Yeah, that's also true.
when your life is like that. That's great. But what I'd say is you can get so far inside, you might forget what it's like to just know anyone else. And I promise you, at least in the cities and things that I've lived in, almost everyone else, and I'm not talking about people in Afghanistan, I'm talking about people in New York and Los Angeles who are, the exact kind of people that, like, for example, even a professional musician who's successful in Los Angeles has no idea what this world is or how to be part of it.
This is really sad. And I know also that this old storytelling, for example, I'm like, as you can imagine, I mean, I used to be an artist, but now since a while I run the gallery. So I'm a big promoter of galleries as cultural creators, not as sheer businesses, but as enablers, as space makers, as real supporters of the arts. In one of your, either in an interview or you wrote that, you can enter galleries for free. So you get cutting edge art. You might like it or not, you have to decide for yourself, but you get cutting edge art without even having to pay an entrance fee. But people think, oh, I don't know about art, so I cannot enter this space because I probably look like an idiot or I'm stupid or whatever. So there's this fear. Whereas I think the new generation of people, I'm really happy for everybody entering the exhibition, and I'm happy for everybody I can explain something to, because my job is not to be arrogant and exclusive. My job is to be educative and helping and open and welcoming, you know?
Yes, yes. And I almost think, I mean, this is taking the conversation a different direction, but one of the things that I'd like to talk about more in general, and it's maybe a broader point than I can rant about for 1 minute or 3 minutes,
Mhm.
but it's a broader topic. I think that somehow inclusivity gets grouped with, what's the right word? With overly intentionally simplified commercial art.
Oh, that can happen. It can happen. It must not, but it can, yes.
That there's this idea that, or maybe the simplest way to say it is, people think that in advocating for a world where more people can see, be part of going to, and even collect art, they
Mhm.
assume that I must be advocating for a dumbing down of art making so that it's no longer difficult or avant-garde or
Mhm.
taking time to learn and understand. But it's the exact opposite. I'd say that one of the great things about art is that so many artworks that are amazing certainly took me a long time to fully understand, or maybe I even was confused by them or even repulsed by them at first. Art, a lot of art does really reward long looking, deep study, research, trying to develop your own expertise. Those are all things that are great. But it's not that we need only museum shows of cartoon characters to dumb down for the audience.
God,
It's,
thank you. Yes, absolutely. I
it's the
mean, this
opposite.
is really, you're running in open doors here with me. I
Yeah,
completely believe that you can even make, if you tell the story in the right way, if you just like make like the threshold to get into such a show should be really easy, but the show can be, I mean, it can be complicated because people are not stupid.
exactly. That's the key part. I think is that there's so many, I was going to say kids, but people of
Hmm.
all ages who would and could be amazing, not just artists and makers, but also understanders, learners, critics, collectors. The important thing isn't to assume that they're stupid or can't grasp
Exactly.
complicated future thinking art, and therefore we have to dumb things down to include them. It's the reverse. We need to include more people to give them a chance to be the deep lookers and learners that so many people of all around the world can be, but just don't even know this world exists. It's almost condescending to assume that the people out there that are not part of art just are stupid and so they aren't part of it because they don't understand it. It's the opposite. The world of art is just not touching enough people, and many of those people would learn about it really deeply and maybe make art that's more challenging, that's more, and I think also it's worth saying that in all forms of art, this divide between challenging and non-commercial art and easy to understand and very commercial art doesn't break down as simply as the greatest art versus the easiest art.
No, absolutely not. I mean, some of the most commercial successful art can be also some of the greatest art, and vice versa.
Exactly right. Yeah, and it's true. And people say it as if, only that automatically, even say that, I remember someone saying in my Instagram comments, think of art house film and avant-garde conceptual art. And they were comparing it to, Marvel Comics movies. But the reality is there's been so much of the greatest art in all fields of all times is both very easy to love and deeply, deeply thought-provoking. I don't think
Absolutely.
anyone would say
Yeah.
that John Lennon or James Brown is a less deep musician than a popular one.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I completely couldn't agree more. But also on the other hand, it's true that there is some great art which is commercially very, very hard, to evaluate, to sell, to all of these things, and still this art has to be seen, you know. And a lot of galleries make this mixed program where you think, well, this artist is so great, but I know it's going to be hard to sell, but I show it anyway because it really starts a conversation. It's important to see that, it has to gain visibility. But I would like to come back what you said before, that more people need to know about this world. More people need to be part of it and learn about it. So what would you suggest? What to do about it?
That's a great question. Well, I mean, as an individual, or what am I trying to do about it, or what
Well,
can we
both.
as I mean, some of it I think is building more. I'm really in favor of rethinking all the ways that art can be shown and
Mm-hmm.
participated in. I mean, this is just one of the many things, but I'm often thinking about the fact that one of the many things I think that holds art back is that even though art reflects all part of society, and increasingly there's a push to include more artists of more backgrounds, both racially and socioeconomically and nationally, in the quote unquote art world, contemporary art discourse. Even so, the places that art is physically shown remain
Mm-hmm.
very small. It's almost as if, the joke I always tell is in New York, people say, hey, there's a great charity event. It's fundraising for homelessness in the Bronx. And I say, oh, that's great. Where's the charity thing? And they say, oh, it's at the Four Seasons in Midtown. That the idea is even in the best intentioned things where people are trying to have art reach or even benefit in a charitable way communities other than the centers of super wealth and power, even so, the art is still shown in the centers of super wealth and power. And that makes it really different than other kinds of fields that, for example, there are movie theaters in many more kinds of neighborhoods than there are
That's true.
art galleries, and especially art museums. So to me, some of it is just rethinking, and even I feel like these connect to some of the things about, there are more questions about the gallery world and the art market, where to me, I mean, obviously the number one factor is that everything is so expensive, especially rent, especially costs of
Shipping, art
shipping and doing
fairs, all
business.
of that.
I
It's
feel
it's a nightmare. Yeah.
art fairs, yeah. So I feel bad for everyone that has a gallery. On the other hand, it seems like an important moment to point out that if people think that what the quote unquote art world is the gallery world, and what the gallery world is many, many white boxes in the highest real estate district of 8 cities in the world. And then people are saying a lot of those entities and that model is struggling. It might be time to rethink that model, because I'm not sure really who that model is really for anymore.
Mm.
It doesn't feel, I mean, nothing wrong with having a white box gallery in Beverly Hills if it's happening very successfully for you. I think it works great for Gagosian. They might not want to change it. But for the galleries that are struggling, I have to wonder, couldn't this be a time to rethink how and where and for who we're showing art? You know,
I mean, I think this is what is happening actually everywhere right now, We're all thinking about new collaborations, which sometimes it's, there are a lot of glitches and a lot of hard things because we are, I would say, everywhere, not only in the art world, in the world. We're in a time of transition. It definitely won't go back to those very prosperous, mostly peaceful, easy times in the West like we are used to. there is something new approaching. We don't know what it is yet. So it's kind of like we're in limbo. A lot of great things can be created in limbo, I think. But we're not quite there yet. So there's a lot of ideas floating through space, but we can't really grasp it. So, what would your suggestion be if you had a gallery?
It's a good question. I mean, I'd say that, I've always wondered, maybe it's just my own taste, but I'll say I've bought quite a lot of artworks in my life, and I don't think it's ever once come up. I've never once bought an artwork because of the room it was in. Room is irrelevant to me. The joke I always tell people is I'd buy an artwork from a truck. There was just the U-Haul art fair. The truth is I remember being in TFAF art fair, and it's in New York in the Armory, and it's very beautiful and it's very expensive. And I thought, it'd be interesting. Like if I had a gallery, like be cool to just sort of like add a venue like that or nearby, set up in a random room. Like I'd much rather buy an amazing painting that's by itself in a bathroom stall. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't care one bit. I could see someone pulling and in the old days, people would show up with a painting. I mean, I remember like stories of people like Thomas Amann and these like legendary private dealers. They would like carry a little tiny painting up with them on a plane, show up to someone's office and just show them the painting on the, whatever. I don't care what room it's in. And I realize there are lots of reasons to have a big fancy room, but I think people almost lost track of what those reasons were.
I think so too. I think it kind of like overdeveloped and it became so people even the artists sometimes they demand you have to grow, you have to get bigger rooms. A lot of the galleries that now are shrinking because they were growing too fast, they told me that, yeah, well, I had to make that room, I had to make that new gallery there because this very successful artist otherwise said he would not show with me anymore. Or probably some very status conscious collectors would say, well, you're still in such a small room, what are you doing? But this, it feels quite old now. It does not feel right
Yes.
anymore to think like that.
And I'd say, this is maybe where I give a disclaimer. I'm very happy to, partly, I think, why I have a role in the conversation around art. I always say, when people ask me why I'm doing it, partly it's I feel obligated because I have nothing to lose. I can't lose my job. I can't be fired by a gallery or museum because I don't work for one. So I feel then I'm going to anyway, just speak honestly, including some contrarian things that might trigger warning to anyone out there. But I'd say that, for example, I'm glad you said that because I think, some of the rapid arms race in cost for everyone isn't just coming from people's bad business planning or greed or anything like that. There is tremendous pressure on galleries to expand. It's worth saying out loud, some of that pressure is coming from artists. And I think that it's a mistake, it's worth saying, obviously, to state the obvious. I'm an artist myself in a different field. My introduction to art, my peers in art have always been artists, not, elderly super collectors. My peers are the artists that I've known, not just because of age, but because of how I think about the world and the art that I continue to write and make myself. So I know for a fact the most obvious thing to state out loud, artists, just like teachers, plumbers, taxi drivers, any other group of people, are just people.
Exactly. They come in all forms and shapes and opinions.
We're all people. And I think that one of the things that I hope to change is almost that there's this feeling of, this is maybe an oversimplification, but that this previous generation, 2 generations ago, the world of art was just tiny. There were no participants. There were very few artists that could make a living. And the only collectors were like a count
Yeah, yeah,
so-and-so and,
yeah.
it's like Peggy Guggenheim and so on and so on. But then more recently, as the world got bigger, still it carried with it this idea that what it meant to be a collector was to be some sort of wealthy, disconnected person from another field, often in a totally different age group, who said, I'm so grateful to be around artists. They're such little angels. I just feel like the artists, whatever they do is perfect. And that's actually sort of, one of the ways that you can be most vicious to a person, other than directly attacking them, is to condescend them as if they're a non-person
Who's
who's not
beyond
real,
the
who has,
world.
or just whatever you do, it's almost sort of
Mm.
condescending. Like, I'm up here, I'm very wealthy, but you're so precious, that
Oh
creativity
yeah,
you're
I
making.
see. I
I
see
might
what you
take
mean.
my chauffeured car down to you. And what that means is it totally separates artists from the community
Mm.
of art in a way, and makes it feel like what you need to be a collector is to be some kind of disconnected patron who really, like, I don't even love the language of all the people who say, oh, I buy art just to support artists. Another really contrarian point.
Yeah, but because this sounds like charity, you know, and I think
Exactly.
like an artist deserves to be, as a gallery, to be paid for the work you do, you know. So if you buy a piece of art because you love it, yes, this makes the gallery and the artist continue. This makes a living for them. But you don't buy it because you pity them and think like, oh, you poor little thing, I have to support you. You buy it because you think it's great. And I think that's a big difference.
Exactly right. And I mean, I think if you want to just buy art as active charity, that's wonderful too. That's your decision.
Actually, yes, everybody who buys art for whatever reason, it's good.
Yeah, any reason is great. But I'd say that this idea put forward that it's the only reason creates all kinds, or that should be the main reason, puts us all in all kinds of problematic scenarios. One, it means, for example, in the thing that we were just talking about, it almost means that the decisions of artists are
Mm,
beyond discussion. So that, for example, like if someone says, oh man, I felt pressure, I had to expand to a bigger gallery, otherwise my biggest artist was threatening to
yeah.
leave me, people would say, well, but of course the artists are so precious. That's just whatever. But I don't agree. I'm happy to criticize or challenge any view that I disagree with, even if it's from
Mm,
my favorite artist. And I would say, your work, miss or sir, I admire your work. I'm a fan of yours. But, on the other hand, I think the pressure you put on this gallery to expand or you leave is messed up. Like it's not one or the other. I don't feel like anyone is beyond conversation. But also there's another reason, which is just that part of what keeps this world small. And I was just saying this in a video that I think maybe some people understand and some people didn't because it's short. You don't have the time to explain. But that, for example, in music, you listen to music mostly because you want to. So why wouldn't that be the reason why you buy a work of art? Because you like it. I think anytime you buy a work of art, you're supporting the arts. But I think that I was just having this conversation with a friend who's a great artist and now a good friend. But I bought a painting by her years ago and we had never met. And then since then we happened to have met and we're good friends. But she was saying to me immediately, if someone said to you, oh, you collect her work? And I'd say yes. And they said, ah, and it's because you're friends, so you wanted to support her.
mm,
In a way, that's deeply
mm-hmm,
condescending to her. And I
absolutely.
would say, absolutely not. I didn't buy her work to support her, even though she, of course, I'll always support a friend. If a friend asks me to, help them move apartments, I'll carry boxes for them, whatever else, I would always support her in any way that I could. But that's not why I bought that painting. I bought that painting because she's really good. The painting is really good and it deserves to stand on its own. It's not a charity, just like you were saying. It was not any way out of pity. It's because she's a great world-class
Exactly.
artist and work stands on its own. Because it gets really tricky, I think, when people say otherwise, it starts to infiltrate all of the language about how people talk
Mm,
about art. Because even, for example, there are people out there that say, for example, when I said, hey, I just bought my first old master painting, someone showed up to say, well, that's really messed up. You should really be supporting living artists. Which, first of all, it's funny, like as if I don't. I mean, do I not work by living artists? I'm like, I don't know where were those people the rest of my, But it's also this idea that someone could come in and condescend you on your creative consumer choice from a point of superiority.
well, as a collector or as a person, you can just do whatever you want, you know? I mean, this is just, although I find it interesting, this mix, and this is why I want to come back a little bit to your role as a collector, because everything you said right now, you could have told me just because you are a spectator in the art world or because you know a lot of artists, you know a lot of people, but you started really buying art, which is a different commitment because you have to, it involves money, but it involves time, it involves space, it involves a lot of things. But then you start at a certain point to decide, well, I'm going to buy art. Why?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it relates to the point I was just saying, which is that, in each decision, I've really done it because I don't know, I couldn't help myself in the same way that if someone asked, hey, you're at home and you chose to listen to a Beatles
Mm.
song. Why? Say, I'm moved me, but I think why that's crucial, apropos of the last point, is that I'm not sure anyone would even dare say to you, really, the Beatles? You should really listen to my cousin's band. They need your support more than the Beatles. Paul McCartney doesn't
Oh,
need
that's
your
really
support,
true.
but
That's a
you see
good
what I mean? Like,
example.
you'd say, but what? I'm going to listen to whatever I am moved to listen to. And I think in a way that separates art from artificially from the other. No one would tell you, don't go see Martin Scorsese's movie. He doesn't need your support. Go see a small artist's movie. You'd think I go see movies because I love movies. I'm going to see whatever I love. So yes, to answer your question, I'd say, you know, some combination. It's because, in a way, it kind of mixes the two paths of my life. I love not just creating things myself, but I love learning from other people. The same reason why I would ask Dirk Schraber about his process, not just about, I knew I couldn't understand really his choice of paint colors, for example, because I had never really painted, but I wanted to know how he thought about the process of creation. So I'd say what got me starting buying art is one of the things that keeps me interested, not just in buying it, but even in looking at the art every day that I already live with, is that I learn something, as cheesy as it sounds, I really do learn something new every day. And it's not just things that I learn in general, they're things that I really use, I guess is the right way to say it, is that I love these ideas of good artists borrow, great artists steal, or
Hmm.
something like that. I'm constantly stealing from and borrowing from and learning from the artists and even artworks that I live with. They give me something, new ways of looking at the world all the time. So that's the kind of cheesy way of looking at it. But also, I think, part of being a deeply curious person is that I love figuring things out. So as early on, I could tell this was a world that both excited me. Artworks, especially artists and artworks themselves, really excited me. And I could tell there were mysteries there that I didn't understand yet. And also simultaneously, I could tell that this was a world that even overtly, even directly, I was being told I really couldn't be part of.
That puzzles me that this still
Yeah, I mean,
happens.
even just down to, my first realm of collecting, I would show up to shows by myself and I would walk up to the front desk and say, hey, what's for sale on the show? And no one would even like look at me because no one knew who I was. But even then, farther along, I remember going to shows and being told, well, everything was reserved for people that were big clients of the gallery. I'm sorry if you're not already a big client of the gallery. And I thought, well, how do you even start if to buy your first work?
Isn't that kind of like something like when the market was really like super hot? And also the second thing,
Yes,
isn't it something very New Yorkish?
I hope so.
Did you experience when you traveled to other country the same attitude?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'd say, well, without naming names, I mean, I suppose just like artists, gallery people, is a group of people with all sorts of some really generous, wonderful, welcoming people, and some people that are the opposite. But I'll say I'll never forget a moment I bought something from a well-known Swiss gallery. And I bought it just at an art fair. It was unsold, and I just walked up. Very nice director offered it to me, sold it to me, and sent me an invoice. And then a few days later, the gallery said actually they wanted to sell the work to someone else. And given that I hadn't paid yet, they wanted to sell it to someone else. And I said,
What?
wait, why? And and so finally, I got the woman who owns the gallery to call me, and she said, my director made a mistake there. I wouldn't have sold this work to you. I would have chosen to put it with someone that we have an ongoing relationship with and we trust more. And I said, and she said, you haven't bought from us before. We don't know you. And we have other people that want this work. And I said, yeah, but that seems like, exclusionary. What's the reason? And she said, well, to be honest, I don't like selling things to young collectors. I said, this sounds like I made this up, but I promise you these are her exact words. She said, we just don't trust the young collectors seem more likely to be speculative or to sell the work. We'd rather not do that. So we'd rather, whatever. And so we were still on the phone and we were talking about a painting by an artist who was not even new to the art market. It's an artist who's fairly established and has had lots of market activity already, partly because he produces lots of work. So while we were on the phone, I went to www.phillips.com and opened the Phillips auction house. And I said, hey, that's interesting. Just to let you know, there are already 47 paintings that have been sold just by this artist, just at Phillips. Were those all from young collectors, at which point she sort of muttered something or whatever and hung up the phone. But I'd say, yes, I mean, I encountered all kinds of, maybe the simplest way to say it is, as just a random guy who doesn't hold himself as if I'm from an important family, and even kind of intentionally, it's maybe something I got from my father. My father was both a highly educated, he is a brilliant man, but also a lot of his professional life, he earned a living as a taxi driver, and he refused to credential up. When people would say, "Who are you?" he'd say, "I'm a taxi driver." He was at some point a teacher, and then he didn't have a job and he was working as a taxi driver. But even when he would come to go give a talk again as a teacher, he said, these are my credentials. I'm a person. And so as someone who doesn't hold themselves as self-important, not coming from an important family, is somewhat younger, maybe not connected to the person I met. Yes, many times.
But isn't that what we all want? Because I have to say that I'm really happy for every new and younger collector that comes in. I even make really special prices for the young ones because I think, well, you have to start, If they really love art, they might be here for 20 years.
Yes. Yeah. It's a confusing thing, right? If anything, it's such a tough position that I'll say I really empathize with owners of galleries, because so many galleries, their lineup of artists, for lack of a better word, the group of artists they represent is, in fact, if you really looked at it, one or two artists that sell very well and have lots of demand, and then many artists that don't.
Sure.
And so then they're in a tough situation, because sometimes those artists that sell well, they really do need to feel like what could they do other than save all those works for whoever buys most from the gallery or is most important in the art pecking order. And I understand partly they're doing that to help sell the rest of the program, and I get that. But it does then create a strange dynamic.
No, I think this is very undemocratic. And I think the only ones where you can really say, okay, I really, this is such an important piece. It's a new work of a very, very new series. It's a key piece. I want this to go to a museum. This is the only thing where I think, yes, I can understand that. First try, or you try to get a collector to donate it to a museum. But everything else is, I think, first come, first serve.
Yeah, and also there has to be some thinking. Even it's one of the ways, full disclosure, I'm someone who offers not just critiques of the art world, but critiques of neoliberal capitalism, to say the obvious. I have provocative opinions, and I'd say, it's not in the way that socialist thinkers have talked about capitalism's relentless pursuit of tomorrow's bottom line, creating their own future gravedigger. It's no more obvious anywhere else than in places like an art gallery, where they feel compelled for tomorrow's bottom line to put whoever's richest, biggest spending, and often oldest first ahead of new people. But then who's going to sustain, if you always privilege the oldest, biggest clients ahead of the new people, who will sustain the gallery in the future? It prevents you even from developing.
Oh, absolutely. And also, I think it makes it very interesting because, this makes it such a rich and various job, because you have to deal with all those different people. You have to cater to all those different people. You learn from all those different people, what their preferences are, what they love, what they don't love, So this is, I think, one of the most exciting things as a gallerist, to be able to meet all these people and listen to them, and really learn what drives them as much as they learn what drives us or what drives the artists, But I think I wanted to go to as a collector again, what in the contemporary art world, the contemporary artworks you collect, what does a work have for you that it intrigues you so much that you want to own it?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I'd say some of the things are just visceral. I'd say it's
like falling in love.
Yeah, and something that both hits me viscerally when I look at it or hear it, or whatever media it's in, but also, I guess, something that I can tell has ideas or thought, or at least inspires ideas or thought in me, that I'll continue to find interesting in the future. Because in a way that makes, one way, it's maybe not talked about enough, that makes, for example, a sculpture or painting or anything physical, an object, different than a film or song. Because the reality is, you buy a ticket to a movie, it can be enough to just like it that one time, and that's enough. You might think, I'll never want to see that again, but I'm very happy I saw it. Whereas if you buy a sculpture, you're stuck with it. You know what I mean? You have to not just have a visceral reaction to it then. Hopefully, you continue to love it in the future because it's going to be there taking up space in your apartment. So I'm looking for things that move me and artists whose ideas continue to excite me and make me think and challenge me. And I suppose that put things out in the world that I believe in. You know, I like a lot of art that's political, that's challenging about things that are happening in the world. And I tend to be less interested in art that's a kind of sardonic comment about other art or about the art world. I don't find as interesting. There's no judgment on anyone else, but I've never really liked, you know, I'm not as interested in art that asks the question like, what is an artwork? You know, I'm like, okay. And even I'd say, even though I love words and ideas, I don't tend to love art that would be better, to me, better expressed as an essay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
I'd love to read your essay, but I don't really know why I need that empty painting that's signaling an idea that you could have just told me. But that's just my taste. So I also like things that are very physical and involve touch and human, just in my own taste. So I love contemporary ceramics and small sculpture and things that people mold with their own fingers. And I tend to love painting that's very
Thick.
yes, and textured and live and
very
yeah,
physical
physical
and energetic.
Yes, yeah, but that's just my taste. But then I'd say the other parts are, I feel like sometimes people just leave it at that. And I really, in the issue of transparency and interest of transparency, I think it's worth saying, I certainly also all often learn a lot from other people and ask their opinions, so I'd be lying if I said that everything that I'm into and I collected just came from me and I found it all myself and discovered it. The main way that I learn about art is from other people. And so, I have great relationships with collectors and art advisors and dealers. I've learned a lot from the dealers that show me the artworks, and I learned a lot even from dealers who it's not there. I ask dealers about other artists and stuff, and I've learned a lot from museum curators. I've been on different museum committees in different cities that I've lived in, a lot in LA, Mocha Hammer. I was on the board of ICA Miami when I was in Miami more. And now over the past few years, I've become more and more involved with the Met in New York. And I continue to learn a lot from the curators there. One of the amazing things about being part of a museum and really developing, part of museum groups and developing real life friendships with the great museum professionals is that to me, it's like just an amazing, I don't know what the word is, just I feel so lucky to be able to ask and learn from the very most brilliant people in these fields. And I suppose that's one of the things that's really helped me a lot. Maybe my biggest attribute in terms of really collecting well, and I'll say something about that in a second, but well in my own eyes, my biggest attribute is that I don't feel like I know anything. So I've learned a lot from other people by just approaching them humbly, and instead of, I think a lot of people, are surprised. They say, how did you learn this from this person? And it's because I asked them instead of being,
exactly.
I know everything. I'll tell you what's what.
But you're definitely not an outsider anymore.
An outsider. No, yeah, I suppose I'm not,
But do you still feel like that?
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like both an outsider and an insider, I feel like I'm someone who, or maybe the right way to say it is,
a world shifter. I mean, you switch from one world to the other.
yeah. And I feel like I'm someone who came from the outside and found his way in. And now I want to go back to the outside to show more people the way in, or maybe make the world of art possible for many more people to be in instead of just a few in.
So, but what is then good collecting?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Okay, so this is something that I've never gotten to say anywhere, but I don't think there's any right way to do it. It's personal. But at the same time, in the same way that I think art being more inclusive doesn't mean dumbing down art, I also think that collecting being an expression of personal taste doesn't mean it's just all the same. I think that's actually been very convenient, especially for people selling art, to propagate the idea that just like, who cares? Just buy stuff. Like, who needs connoisseurship or like thinking about how to do this well? Just just buy things. That's what art is. I deeply disagree. And one of the ways that I think is most relevant is they're always, top collector lists, different profiles on big collectors. And I wanted to ask, okay, so if there can be lists of top collectors, clearly that's sort of implying that it's something, at least within oneself, it's a pursuit that you can learn to do better. That's a lifelong challenge that you can get better at, that it's in part a skill, not just a personal taste. It's something you can develop and improve on. But the question is then, what is it? What's that quality that you'd want to improve? And this is where I'd say the most important thing. I reject the idea that what it means to be the best collector is to spend the most money. Sounds obvious, but yet for some reason it's sort of propagated in the idea that like artists make art, they try to be as great as possible, and then your job as a collector is just spend lots of money and shut up. I think the exact opposite.
But the greatest art is also not the most expensive one,
Exactly
not
right.
necessarily.
Yeah. In fact, so many great art was totally unknown for many decades, centuries,
Absolutely.
So to me, that's the kind of, and I think when someone dies, suddenly people start to talk about, wow, Leonard Lauder had such a connoisseur's eye. He learned so much about. So for example, when people are starting to collect, a lot of the message goes out, there's no right or wrong, just buy stuff, just buy a lot of stuff, and there's no right way to do it. So yeah, great. If you're just buying a bunch of things, don't even really spend time learning about it. Just buy it. Don't think too much.
But you would say the thing to be a great collector is learn.
Yes, learn, but I'd say and learn, but here I mean learn as much as you want to and can, but also with an eye for not just what periods of art you like or even which artists, but which art works. That a lot of what you're doing, and this I really subscribe to the idea that creation and judgment are separate. That when one is creating something, you should be able to create it totally free, market concerns,
Absolutely.
critical reception, and that a lot of what your job is as an artist, and by that I mean not just a painter or even a musician, but even anyone that puts anything you create out in the world, even down to when I make a video, I can't know
Even down to our talk.
our talk. Yeah, we can't know who will like it. We just do our best.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
we don't know.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I do believe with this talk as an example that it is totally the opportunity and even responsibility of the people listening to decide whether they think it's a good one or not. I'll do my best in the talk, and so will you. And then other people will evaluate it and they'll decide, should I listen to this one or a different one? Maybe I'd rather listen to Alain Servet because he has interesting ideas or, whatever. That's great. So to me, it's like you put something out in the world and it's for other people to judge, literally. And so I think a lot of what's interesting as an art collector is it's no insult to the artist, but that, for example, artists I love, it's not enough to just say like, I collect their work, checked it off the box. Though hopefully some of what you're doing is learning about what makes, in your own eyes, what makes a work by that artist especially great. And you're sort of building something that you're putting together. It has to do with understanding quality. And here's where I think it gets interesting. If it's just pure connoisseurship and understanding quality and what matters, and you're deciding, the artist makes all the work, and you help decide in your own eyes which works matter to you. But the key thing there, I think, where it matters, and this is some of the places where I sometimes go off the script about how art's been talked about, the only then relevant question is budget. Because, for example, to me, the thing that I'm proud of in art, I basically have had two lives in art. In the last year and 2 months, I've been making videos talking about art. But before then, I just bought art. So what's that mean? I just bought some stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like, what was the point? I just, bought a bunch of stuff and looked at it and whatever. To me, what I'm proud of isn't just exercising my judgment about what's interesting and learning about it or acquiring several artworks. What I'm proud of is doing my best to make a deeply meaningful art collection to me with an extremely limited budget. And I actually think that's the only thing that makes it interesting. I think that, for example, if you were to say, okay, there's two art collectors, who is doing a great job as an art collector? The first is someone who comes from nothing and has put together their art collecting bit by bit, learning not just about the artworks, but finding great opportunities to buy works by artists before they're really famous, or maybe even after they're really famous, and when everyone forgets about them and there's a great moment to collect their art. Or the second person just inherited $100 billion and they just wrote it. They didn't go to Art Basel. They just wrote a check and said, give me everything at the fair. I'll take everything. Is that great art collecting? To me, that's the opposite of great art collecting. That's boring. It's boring if you can just buy everything. It's boring.
Actually, some of the greatest art collectors really, really started small because they had limited budget,
Yeah.
So when you have that, and some of the greatest artists, actually, they didn't have money to buy the most fancy material. So they had to have great ideas to work with the lowest materials. And the same is true for collectors. Same is true for some good galleries, who had to really be very inventive because they didn't have the money to make big spaces. So they had to make great small spaces. I think actually a limited budget sometimes leads to the best ideas,
I couldn't agree.
But we also take a lot of money. Jeff, I wanted to actually go also to you starting collecting old masters, but we're now beyond the hour, and we don't want to, I could really talk for hours, and I think we have to do a second talk where we thematically go to other edges and other corners. But for now, I want to sum it up that you're curious, you think one has to learn, you do your videos where you speak out, you want to make the art world more inclusive and transparent. And you're a very open and curious person. So anything else, one sentence you want to say, which is where you think, oh, this is something important I want to get off my chest?
No, other than just you ask great questions, and I love how you look at things. So thank you for doing it.
Thanks so much, Jeff, to be my guest. I really enjoyed it talking to you.
Same.
In today's talk, Jeff and me didn't address the founding of his art foundation in Mexico City, which is about to happen now. Also, we didn't discuss the current political situation in the US, which endangers freedom for all people and for sure the freedom of art. I'm looking forward to continuing the talk with Jeff. Book pick. Today I'm recommending Donna Tartt's The Goldfinch, in German Der Distelfink, because it's a powerful novel about how art can shape a life. The book was originally published with Little Brown and Company, and the German version was published with Goldmann Verlag, so just that you know where to get it. The story follows Theo, a boy who survives a bombing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and in the chaos takes a small masterpiece, Karel Fabricius' The Goldfinch. That single painting becomes a thread running through everything that follows: his grief, his identity, his career, and his understanding of beauty. So the grief is because his mom died in this bombing. It was very consequential, and because it's happened in a museum, the art he took from there, the art he saw there, the art that was present, was also very consequential for his life. The novel shows art not as luxury for the life of Theo and maybe for all our lives, but it's necessity. The painting becomes Theo's connection to love, to memory, and to meaning when the rest of his world falls apart. It also becomes a burden because he stole it, a secret, a moral weight, showing that art's power isn't always gentle, but it is transformative. That's an interesting point, I think. The Goldfinch is a reminder that art can be a compass. It can hold us together, give shape to loss, and offer something enduring while life feels fragile, as it often does or sometimes can. So we can always return to art to give us strength and to give us a direction. That's why I think this book belongs in any conversation about art and about how to lead a meaningful life. And I recommended Donna Tartt, The Goldfinch, in German, Der Distelfink. Read it, enjoy it. Thank you. Please find links and a text about my guest in the show notes. For more information on Voices on Art, the Van Horn Gallery podcast, follow us on Instagram at Voices on Art and at van_horn_Düsseldorf. Visit our website van-horn.net and subscribe to Voices on Art, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the platform of your choice. Thank you for listening to Voices on Art, the Van Horn Gallery podcast hosted by Daniela Steinfeld. Stay tuned and connect.